Thank you, Marty. Well, the minister was talking to a 6-year-old little boy, and he said, "So your mother prays with you and for you every night?" And he says, "That's right. She says a lot of prayers for me." And the minister says, "Well, that's really commendable. What does she say?" He says, "Well, mostly she says, 'Thank God he's in bed.'" Thank God he's in bed. Ernest Wilson wrote The Week That Changed the World, talking about the last week of Jesus' life. And I want to begin this morning reading the beginning, so that you get the feel for the experience of Easter that we're in. You know, in Unity, our whole Myrtle founded it based on healing, but it was on the healing principles of the life of the Christ within us. And in Unity, it's Christmas and Easter, the birth of the Christ within us, and then the final overcoming of the power of the Christ within us in all things. So those two seasons are really all about the Christ and the Christ Spirit as it grows and develops in us. And so I want us to really feel after that, the next between now and Easter. So it says, "It is given to only a few people to change the course of history. It was given to one man, Jesus Christ, to change the world. And all of the days of his short span of life, it was perhaps the last week that changed it most of all. The 7 days from his final entry into the city of Jerusalem until the resurrection. A week that changed the world. 5 things done by Jesus especially roused the established authorities against him. And now scholars say that maybe these things, the timeline of the miracles he performed and the things he did, a lot of scholars have studied and put them in different orders. But at the time when when Ernest Wilson was writing, it says he cast out evil spirits from an afflicted man this last week. He dined with a Pharisee without conforming to the custom of washing before the meal. He set aside the restrictions on what a person might eat. He healed a sick woman on the Sabbath. And finally, he raised Lazarus from the dead. And it was this miracle that sealed his fate, as far as the authorities were concerned. From that day on, they took counsel how to put him to death. And Jesus therefore no longer went about openly, but went from there to the countryside, and there he stayed with the disciples. It's been conjectured that Jesus went away, but strong men are less likely to be seen running from something than going toward something. Jesus was drawn to the country near the wilderness for a reason that reaches back to the beginning of his ministry. At the time of his baptism, he went up onto a high mountain place where he faced the temptations of worldly power and acclaim, and he rejected them. How natural, then, that he should return to this area, a place apart when the thoughts of his human life and met with his spiritual destiny. "Now is my soul troubled," he said, "and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, for this purpose I have come to this hour." And from this point on, the tenor of his ministry changed. There was a greater intensity, a greater urgency in his message. His often playful manner of speech, the easy camaraderie with the 12 was gone. And the inevitability of the way he was to go came into sharp focus. So that's the week that we're going to be talking about between now and Easter. "For this was I kept, For this was I kept, not my will, but thine be done. We all have a place in us where the human self of us meets the divine. And the divine is so magnificent. We find it hard to believe that, what? You have all that for us, God? At least I do, you know. That place where we reconcile all the time, the human self and the divine self. So this week, as I'm beginning a series, an Easter series, entitled Doorways to God Consciousness. Doorways to God Consciousness. And I'm inviting you to look with me at some of the teachings that Jesus gave in his final week of life, when his ministry was fully developed, his life purpose was set in place, and the way he was to go and the steps he was going to follow to fulfill his destiny were in sharp focus. And I want to do that so that each of us can follow through those doorways into our own resurrection. As Marty said in his meditation, we have an opportunity to say yes to the expansiveness of the God life that's in all of us. When you write your questions today, for me, how do you want to grow spiritually? What's most important to you now in your spiritual growth? For me, it's trying to get the little me out of the way so that the big Christ I am I can live from that completely. And that is easier said than done, isn't it? Raise your hand if you find that's true. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about there. Charles Fillmore said, Jesus was born into the race thought, into the collective consciousness, so that he might reconstruct it in conformity with divine law. The whole race was caught in the meshes of its own thought, and through ignorance would have remained there had not a break been made in the structure and the light of a higher way let in. Kind of feels like where we are in our nation now, doesn't it? We're kind of caught in the meshes of an evolution of something, and we need a break. There's a breakthrough that's happening, and we're in the middle of it. Anyway, and the light of a higher way is being let in. Jesus made that break, Mr. Fillmore said. Jesus made that break in the collective consciousness and threw open the door to the spiritual realm. So we have the capacity to enter into the door that he opened. We can let in our own lives the light of a higher way. And so in this series, it's only 5 weeks till Easter, get your dresses and your bonnets ready. In this 5 weeks, we're going to look at 5 doorways to God consciousness, to see what Jesus was finalizing in his own consciousness in preparation to make that resurrection, to make that final overcoming. So the 5 doorways include setting an intention, which will then awakening, and then surrendering in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then assimilating all that's happening in us as we're making this overcoming, and then finally overcoming or resurrection. Those are the 5 doorways. And as we journey through those, right from the beginning today, I want to invite you to choose one thing in your life that you would like to resurrect. Something in you that you want to resurrect. And I'm not talking about an old relationship or a former job. I'm not talking about anything outside of yourself. I want you to choose one aspect of God consciousness, one aspect of the Christ Spirit that you want to integrate more fully into your life. And so that where something in you is dormant or dead or asleep or buried in the tomb of human limitation that Easter represents the overcoming of, that it can be lifted. You can claim it, choose it, and then lift it into the resurrecting power of the Christ. So one thing, doesn't have to be a big thing, like the greatest thing in your life ever, but I would invite you to choose one thing, and sometimes it's easier to choose a simple thing. Not that any overcoming in consciousness is always easy, but something that's simple so you can follow the 5 steps, and then you'll have the formula. And then you can follow them for bigger things, you know what I mean? If you're going to heal from cancer, let's start with maybe having more patience, and use the 5 steps for that as we walk through them these next 5 weeks, and then you'll have the procedure, the formula, whatever you want to call it. So when the big things of life come, you know the process, you know the resurrecting process power, and you have the faith and the belief to follow it. So today we start with the first doorway, which is intention. And as you think about your life, what do you intend to resurrect? What's something that you want to intend to resurrect? And I'm going to leave you with an affirmation this week to work on that's, I set an intention to open more fully to the Christ of my being. I intend to be, or I intend to become, and then you fill in the blank. So, I set an intention to open more fully to the Christ of my being. I intend to become, or I intend to be, whatever it is, and then you fill in the blank. Now, as I said, maybe start with something a little more simple. Not that these are simple, but I intend to be less critical. Right? I intend to worry less. I intend to have more faith. You know, something that we can work with resurrecting in consciousness. And I want to coach you for a minute and ask that you not choose negative words like, I intend to be less critical or less worrisome. Because we all know that our words carry that energetic power to create whatever we're talking about, right? So don't choose something that you don't want in your life. Don't say, I intend to be less critical. You would say, I intend to be more patient, or I intend to be more accepting, I intend to be more understanding, something like that. Spin it into the attribute of consciousness that you want to expand in your life, that you want to resurrect in your life. Are you with me? Yeah, it's not I want to worry less, it's I intend more faith. You speak from the divine idea that embodies the truth of your spirit. Maybe you want to feel less stressed. So again, it's not, you don't want to resurrect more stress in your life by saying, I intend to be stress-free, because you'll just create more stress that you need to be free from. Are you with me? The power of our words, right? So it's, I intend to be at peace. I intend to be at peace, or even I intend to relax more, something like that. Maybe you don't speak up for yourself enough and you have feelings that you're shy or feelings of inadequacy. You want to say, I intend to be confident. I intend to live my most authentic self. So you see the pattern, right? You're with me on all of that. Choose something to resurrect that you feel has a strong hold on you. A stronghold. Something that feels dead to life and happiness in you. That thing that just kind of sits like a low-grade infection in your life. That it's not really that bad, but it doesn't really set you free to be all that you can be. Someplace you know you're stuck, living in fear, doubt, regret, resentment, and walk through this first doorway by setting a deliberate intention to resurrect and overcome it in the next 5 weeks. Won't you feel great? At Easter, we'll be celebrating. Jesus resurrected his body, and he overcame the physical world. And we can look at how he did that and gain some clues to his success, but we have to start with the intention. We have to start back at the beginning of his ministry. He knew how the human mind can wrap itself around erroneous thinking, around negative thinking, around doubts and fear and all of that. So immediately after John baptized him, he went up to the mountain alone into the wilderness to fast for 40 days and 40 nights, retooling his own spirit for the gift of ministry that he would give to the world, retooling and preparing himself for his divine purpose. Remember that the number 40, you all remember, is symbolic of metaphysically represents the amount of time sufficient to accomplish or complete something. So 40 days, 40 nights. Noah was in the ark and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. 40, 400, any multiples of that number signify the amount of time a sufficient period of time for something to complete itself. So we see that he was in the wilderness 40 days and 40 nights. And during this time, he was tempted by Satan. Crazy thinking. We know this because when we translate Aramaic to English, Satan means crazy thought. Crazy thought. So for 40 days, as he's retooling his spirit, he's overcoming crazy thought in consciousness, just like we're going to do. Just like we're going to lift up in consciousness that thing, whatever it is that we want to resurrect, and then everything unlike it is going to float up to challenge us with all those thoughts about how, what, when, and where, and why it doesn't work, and it's never worked before, and all that crazy thought. So he retooled his spirit. He overcame crazy thought within himself. He overcame the lower vibrations of his consciousness. He overcame the tendencies toward personal power. He overcame the tendencies toward material possessions, and the tendencies toward his ego, and the tendencies toward self-aggrandizement, all of that. So much so, he ultimately said to Satan, "Get thee behind me. Get thee behind me." And when Satan, the ego, came and said, "Come on, turn these stones to bread. You don't have to fast. You know you can eat. Nobody's here. Nobody can see you. Manipulate. You can do this." He responded, he would not. "For it is written, man should not live by bread alone." And he demonstrated that he's getting rid of any sense of personal power, the little me, the little Jesus in front of the big I am. He's getting rid of any sense of power outside of God. And he cemented an understanding that you cannot satisfy your soul with materiality, that we feed our souls, that we grow our consciousness, that we step into our full authentic self when we live the reality of God, the great I am that's in us. Well, the ego came back and said, "Throw yourself off this cliff and have angels save you. You know you can do it. You're the greatest." And again he said, "It's written, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. Get thee behind me, crazy thinking." And again he's understanding what we all have to understand, that as we begin to advance in consciousness, it can be tempting to think we're the ones doing it. You know, you begin to develop spiritually, and you take command of your life, and your life goes better, doesn't it? We all have great lives, and great things happen to us, and we just look lucky or fortunate or blessed. But it's consciousness, and it happens, and over the years you grow and you develop, and you be tempted to think that you're the one that's doing it. You're the one that's cooperating with it. But you're not the one doing it. I always say, when's the last time you made a human heart or an ocean, right? You're not. So we never need to display the spiritual power that we're developing. We never want to let that ego drive us. Eric Butterworth always used to ask the question, what absolutely compels God to act? What absolutely, every time